Welcome back, everyone. I'm Roger Killen, your host for the two-day How to Achieve Reach and Influence webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to help speakers who aspire to have an important message heard, listened to, and reacted to by an enormous audience. It's to help you understand that great speaking skills aren't enough, and that there are other skill sets that you need to be aware of and hopefully acquire a degree of mastery over in order to share your important message with the world and have the world take action around that. We started this morning at 9 o'clock with Katja Bujalud, then George Verdolaga, and now we're moving on to Rod Janz. And Rod is going to talk to us about podcasting from the perspective of both a guest and a host. But first, a few words about Rod. Ever since Rod was a child, he has had an interest in radio. In college, Rod and a few friends started a radio station, and it lasted all of 2 weeks. Rod took the Introduction to Broadcasting course at the British Columbia Institute of Technology, and he enjoyed it, but it also convinced him that he didn't want a career in radio. In 2009, Rod heard about podcasting, thought he'd give it a shot, and fuelradio.com was born. Rod absolutely loves interviewing people. He finds it fascinating and inspiring to hear people's stories. He gets a real thrill out of hearing how people are using their areas of expertise to influence and change the world for the better. Rod is an entrepreneur, podcast producer, and spiritual director. He loves walking and meditating in the outdoors. He's been married for 32 years to Kathleen. She is the amazing mom of their 2 daughters, who are the apples of Rod's life. Rod, over to you. Introduce yourself to our audience.
Oh, thank you, Roger. And first of all, congratulations on pulling this all together. It's no small feat, and I'm excited for this workshop and telesummit and what you've been able to put together. So, yeah, you know, as my introduction said, I've been podcasting since 2009. We first got our start. My dad is in the motivational field, and he knew a number of motivational speakers, and that's how we got started. We thought that we would interview different motivational speakers, and it's just continued on from there.
Lovely. So before we get into you and your content, tell us how you would like to ask you questions. You got 3 choices, really. We'll ask you questions. We put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. And from there, you can address them as we go through the hour together, or we can batch them all towards the end, or you can start answering a few questions as we go and see how Tam is going, and then answer them at the end. How would you like to approach this?
Yeah, let's batch them and look at the end.
At the end.
Check them out at the end. Yeah.
All right. Great. So let's start with an opening question for you. Why on earth is an understanding of podcasting crucial for speakers who aspire to share their important message with impact and influence?
At this time, it's really a huge thing. And just an example of that is Doug, who might be on the call right now, and we went down to a summit in San Diego called the New Media Summit. There was over 300 people there, and it was a mix of speakers and authors and coaches, all kinds of people that wanted to participate or wanted to be podcast guests. And then they had some of the top podcast hosts there. And yeah, there's a real movement right now for speakers and authors and coaches and whatever your niche might be to be on a podcast. And I'll go into some more detail, but I have 8 points here. You get backlinks. There's evergreen content. It gives you exposure. It's a great way to meet people. They're podcasts are usually have quite good production value. There's long form posts. They're inexpensive. You get leads, and the bottom line for everybody is you have the opportunity to sell stuff. So there is the opportunity to make money. And I've interviewed many speakers, and it just seems to be a very good forum for speakers, especially.
Great. Well, those are pretty compelling reasons as to why speakers would want to have a working knowledge of podcasting. Now,
Sure.
How did you acquire this interest and expertise? Give us a little bit of backstory.
Okay, like you said in my introduction, just always had an interest in radio. I had an interest in radio as a kid, probably like most people from way back when, in the 70s, 80s. Radio. We didn't have the internet, and so the radio was the go-to for listening to songs, and then eventually listening to talk radio. We still have CKNW here in Vancouver, which is was a great source of information. And if you had an interest in politics or sports or whatever, radio was the place to go. And I guess I just kind of, when the opportunity to start podcast, the internet came on board, and when the opportunity to start podcasting appeared, I just thought I would give it a try. I was kind of in a transitional space at that time in terms of work and a job, and I just thought I would give it a try, and it's just kind of been self-taught ever since then. I have a bit of a aptitude for marketing, and I found out that I really, really enjoy interviewing people. I heard recently, if you want to find out what your gifts are, find out what people compliment you on. And I've often been told that I ask good questions and that I'm a good listener. And so I think that I have a natural aptitude for it. I interviewed someone yesterday for the Get Inspired Talks podcast, and she's a counselor, and she told me that I ask great questions, and I'm like, oh, that's that's lovely. That's just reinforcing my gift, and I just love to hear that. If I have someone who has a master's in counseling telling me that I ask good questions, I'm like, oh, you made my day.
It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
Now, if I asked your daughters if their dad asks good questions, what do you think they might say?
I think they might agree. I think they might think I'm a little bit quiet and shy naturally, but I think they would agree.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So, Rod, give us about 30 minutes of basic training.
Okay.
On how to be a great guest and how to be a great host.
Okay, great.
Of a podcast.
So, Roger, do I just hit the share button here and sort of take over the screen? Is that
share screen, and then you can share your slides.
Okay. Excellent. Looks like I'm up, and I will start.
And then you might want to go to full screen. There you go. That's gorgeous.
Good. So I'll just talk about the power of podcasting. I often people who don't necessarily listen to podcasts often don't see the value of it. So these are some of the things I listed off of the top, and then I'll go into some more detail. Also, we went through this as well. Roger asked me about this. What's my background with podcasting? A couple of highlights. In 2016, I did an interview with Sarah Blondin, who's a meditation teacher. That interview has had 58,000 listens and gets another. When I first made this PowerPoint last week, it was at 56,000. So we're getting about 2,000 listens for that particular interview every week. So that's been one of my most popular interviews ever. Pretty exciting. And then, I really do just love it for networking and for meeting people. So I've met Sarah Blondin, Paul Young, who wrote the book The Shack, and then they did a movie. And of course, I've met Roger Killen, who has become a good friend. And I just really enjoy what we're doing. And I could name several others that through podcasting, it's been a great networking opportunity, and friendships have transpired. So for you, the speaker, here we go. Why be a guest on podcasts? And this is what I first of all want to encourage our listeners and our speakers to consider. Is it's a great way to promote your speaking business and to get more gigs. And right off the top, one of the most powerful things that you can do is to get backlinks. And whenever you do an interview, the host of the podcast is going to create backlinks for you, hopefully. Hopefully they're going to put a link in back to your website so that people can find out more information, find out how to book you. Hopefully, again, the host will do social media posts, and then they're going to put it out on different podcast platforms like iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and a whole bunch of others. And then if they're a host with any worth any value, they'll also put you on a whole bunch of different directories. So that's going to create some backlinks, hopefully back to your website. And so that's something. The tip there is, I would say, if you're going to be a guest, make sure that you ask what sort of backlinks that you're going to receive from the host. Really, really important. And it's one of the most powerful SEO things. So it's one of the most powerful things as far as optimizing your own website is concerned. Why be a guest? Evergreen content. You may have heard that term. It's content that stays out there forever. And podcasts are the gift that keep on giving. Some of you are familiar with George Moen and Rapid Time Networks. We did a podcast for them. And one of the things that we did is we interviewed different members of the networking group, and we interviewed his name escapes me right now, but he's Scott Berg, was the owner at the time of Trade Exchange, and our interview with him got onto the first page of Google for over 2 years if you put in barter in Vancouver or some form of that keyword. So I mean, you just can't, and we did that interview for him for free. And you just can't buy that kind of, I mean, I know I'm in marketing. I know my clients sometimes pay thousands up per month to get that kind of SEO value. Jeff Jones was someone that I interviewed recently for fuelradio.com, my own podcast. And I think you can see it. It's one of these links down here. There it is right there. This is the first page of Google. And my interview with him is down here. But you can see he was one of the people at that New Media Summit that I talked about. He's using podcasting as an approach. And all of these different podcasts that he's done are showing up. This is the first page of Google, are showing up on the first page of Google. So he's getting some good Google juice, as we say, out of that. And then exposure, you get access to the host's highly engaged audience. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Friendship, like I said, you get to meet people like George Moen and Roger and different authors and all kinds of stuff. It's a great way of a podcast interview is usually a really great conversation, and I can't tell you how many times, almost every single time, that I get finished in an interview and interviewing someone where the guest says, wow, that was a lot of fun. And you really get to know people quite quickly because you have your undivided attention for like 30 minutes. Production value. Often the host is going to have good sound. They're going to make you sound good. They're going to take out the ums and ahs. They're going to add graphics. They're going to do text. Doug, I don't know if Doug is on right now, but for the Real Marketing Real Fast podcast, he gets his podcasts totally transcribed. So long, I take care of the editing of the text for him, and I put one in a word counter yesterday. It was 8,000 words, all about his current guest. And so then, you're getting posts and professionally done, well done posts. Long form, like I just talked about. Again, this is a great SEO thing. Doug is getting about 8,000 listeners a month, and he figures it's because he is transcribing his episodes. So my tip there is if the host doesn't do it, you do it. There's a website called rev.com, and you can go there and get your audio transcribed. There's another one, I need to look it up, that is less than rev.com. Rev.com charges about $1 a minute, or $1 a minute, which can get kind of expensive. But Actually, if you're just doing one, it's not that bad. So for $30, if it's 30 minutes, you can get a long form post. And then this one doesn't quite fit. I was looking at my PowerPoint earlier, but just another tip is climb the ladder. Don't go to Tim Ferriss or some of these other top podcasts right off the bat. It depends on who you are, I guess. But I would encourage you to start small and then work your way up the ladder. It's inexpensive. I mean, again, this is Tom Schwab, who was on Doug's podcast, Real Marketing Real Fast. It's an inexpensive way to do inbound marketing. And the whole key to inbound marketing is to have some content. Why be a guest? I know I'm really beating this horse, but there's so many wonderful reasons to be a guest. When people hear you and hear the interview, we often in networking, we talk about the know, like, and trust factor. People are going to hear you and hear your voice, and your personality is going to come out. And there's going to be that know, like, and trust factor built into it. It's easy. You're probably going to be on a podcast. I know at Toastmasters or whatever, they ask the question, what could you talk about for 45 minutes without stopping? More than likely, you're going to be on a podcast covering your area of expertise. So it's just a real easy way to go. You get shareable content. So, and it's just multiplied by article shares and social media shares. I know I keep talking about Doug, but Doug does such a great job of promoting his own podcasts. He'll create 14 or 15 tweets out of each interview. So, not every host does that, obviously, but you can do that too. And I really encourage you to do that if you get on a podcast. Time spent on page. Again, if someone's listening to a podcast on your, say you post the interview on your website, then they're going to spend a lot of time on your website listening to that interview. And then, of course, sales, always provide a lead magnet if you have one. I interviewed my dad for fuelradio.com. He had written a book, and sales were kind of lagging. And we sold 75 books as a result of his being on the, he sold a lot of books. I mean, he sold over 18,000 copies of that book, I think, up to the point where we had this episode. But so it was a while after the book had come out, and we still sold another 75 books as a result of the interview. And then another one of Doug's clients or interviewees on the Real Marketing Fast podcast said, by the way, we just closed a deal with a multi-million-dollar company that specifically, when asked, how did you come to find us? They heard me on a podcast. A podcast is simply an audio file. It's shareable content, and it goes on platforms. It'll go on the host's website, more than likely. Often you can put a link on your website, and then it'll go into things that are commonly found on our phones, like iTunes and Stitcher, and others, many others. And then who's it for? Obviously, we're talking to speakers, but whatever niche you serve, there's probably a podcast for that. Okay, so how to get booked. So yeah, if you're a speaker and you're still with us, please listen to this. It's pretty easy, actually. Search for some of the top podcasts in your industry. Go to iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud and Google and this search engine called Audio Search. And, just simply put in your area of expertise, maybe best. Let's say you're a speaker, you're speaking on relationships, best relationship podcast. Just search for that on these different platforms. And we all know how to do search, but that's the way to go. And then, you might want to create a spreadsheet and begin to keep track. Do they have listeners? Is it relevant to what you're talking about? On iTunes, you're going to want to look for reviews. Do they have a lot of reviews? And the same thing on Stitcher. And on SoundCloud, you're going to look for followers. And like I said, create a spreadsheet and then pitch the host. Often you can find the host's email on their website, and you're going to send them just a real simple email like this one. And I think, if you want a copy of this, just let me know. But your podcast whatever the podcast is amazing. I was listening to your interview with so-and-so, and I realized I know the perfect guest for your interview, me. I can't tell you how much it means to me if when I hear as a podcast host that the potential person who wants to be a guest has actually listened to my podcast. This first line is a real attention grabber for me. It shows me that they've done their research, and potentially that when we do the interview, that they're going to do something with the interview. And then talk about why you would be interesting and relevant, and provide a topic, and let them know some dates that will work for you. And then if you can send them some additional information, like say you've been interviewed somewhere else, a media one sheet, which I will go over. And the source of this was an article on Medium. And you can also go through a booking service. I've been using Interview Valet. I just let them know that I host a podcast. These two services that I've listed here, they do charge, but man, do they ever set you up for success. So, if you have the budget for it, I would strongly suggest that you go through one of these two people or others. These two companies do a fabulous job. Talk about know, like, and trust. I know the owner of Interview Valet, just a great guy, and they do a great job. They actually assign like a valet to you and they'll look after you, and they will reach out to podcast hosts that are relevant to you and get you booked. If you want an introduction to either of these two people or these two companies, please send me an email and I'll arrange an introduction. Tom, specifically.
Rod, could you maybe comment on the cost?
Yeah, it's not cheap. I'm not exactly sure what Nicole charges. An Interview Valet is probably around $1,000 or more to set up. And then I'm not sure what their ongoing fee is. So, yeah. And then I mentioned earlier, Media One sheet, and make it easy for the host. I love this. I can't tell you how often, I refer to this when someone sends me one of these sheets, I refer to it every time. It gives me suggested topics. It provides me with some suggested questions, which are great. I get the interviewee's bio. This one happens to be mine. And then if you can provide links to your various social media platforms, that will help them promote you. And then something else that I just love, and if you're a podcast host and you're listening to this, is for the Get Inspired Talks podcast, we have set up a Google questionnaire. And this also has just been a lifesaver for me as far as the Get Inspired Talks podcast. It's just fabulous. So if you're interested in participating in the Get Inspired Talks podcast, please email me and then fill out the questionnaire. This is a great tool. And then continuing on with how to be a great guest, listen to the podcast. Like I said, leave a rating and a review. Those are so valuable to the podcast host. Make sure that you share it. Without a doubt, the very best, like I spend about an hour promoting the podcasts that I do, but there's just something about it, just has so much more impact when the person being interviewed shares it as well. Quite often people will come on and they come on as almost like they feel like they're celebrities, and then they don't do any sharing at all. But when the guest shares it, it just seems to up the exposure all that much more. Make sure you serve and don't sell. I had an interview here recently where actually I booked this guest through Interview Valet, and Interview Valet they send a follow-up questionnaire, and I asked to do the interview over because it just became an infomercial, and I didn't want to expose my listeners to that. So, be there to serve and to educate. That's the number one principle in inbound marketing anyways, is to educate your listeners and tell stories. Little quote here again from Nicole Holland and the Real Marketing Real Fast podcast. The people who are listening are tuning in because they really want to either be entertained, inspired, educated, or a collection of all those things. So yeah, have fun. Remember that it's entertainment, and that you're there to inspire and to educate. I love this interview that I did with this gal. She's a former lawyer. Now she's turned marketer. And so she set up a URL on her website. Really smart. So I'm sending people over to her website. She mentioned this during the interview. She already had this set up. So it's CorinneOlsenAgency.com/fuel. And then she did a little infographic for our listeners based on fuelradio.com. I'm focusing on the Wi-Fi lifestyle. And she did a 5-point infographic on the Wi-Fi lifestyle. How to be a great guest. Make sure that you have a good mic in a quiet room. I did a podcast yesterday, which we're more than likely going to have to redo because there was a garbage truck beeping in the background for almost half the interview. The content was great. It was so unfortunate that was going on. And I think we're going to have to redo it. Be on time, turn off your phone. And like I say, have a conversation. Don't give a speech. And keep in mind of serving the host and their audience. So Roger, I'm just going to transition here just real quick into why start a podcast. And I'm just going to look at how I'm doing for time. Looks like I'm doing okay. Number one is, Roger, do you have any questions, or do you want me to stop for a second?
You have a couple of questions. Would you like to field a couple of questions?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Sure. Rather than I'm doing exactly what I'm talked about earlier, just giving a speech. So let's
all right.
Let's have a bit of a conversation here. That'd be good.
So I think you've answered it, but I'll fire it out to you again.
Okay.
Terry, the sailboat coach, asks, how can I get more podcasts to be invited to? I love being a guest on podcasts, and it feels great when they find me. However, I'd like to take initiative and accelerate the process.
Yeah, good, Terry. Yeah, I think we did cover that briefly. Again, I would say do your research, and just start emailing some of the hosts that are relevant to your subject. And it'll take a little bit of work, but I appreciate it when I get emails from potential hosts. And then also you can, if you have the budget for it, you can participate in one of these services. There's quite a few of them out there now, actually. So, and Roger, maybe one day we should do a similar event to the New Media Summit where we audition potential speakers and make it sort of a big deal. I don't know, but anyways, that's jumping way ahead.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So that's the one and only question.
Okay.
So
Okay. Great.
You're back on track now. Right
on. So why start a podcast? Now, I just want to say, I want to be realistic here. Podcasts are a lot of work. In one sense, they're quite easy to do, but if you're going to do a really good job, it's a lot of work. A couple of the podcasts that I'm currently producing, I'll just go through the reasons why they're doing it. The Smart Savvy podcast, they are like an HR company. They match marketing people with marketing companies. Just a really first-class company. They haven't launched yet because they're so taking their time and want to make sure that we do a good job. But their goal is to expand their company down the West Coast. So what they're going to do is talk to the top. They're going to book guests from the top marketing companies in Washington and Oregon and in California, and they're going to use that as a networking tool. I know Doug at Real Marketing Real Fast. He's always trying to find good vendors for his clients. And so he's talking to people who have social media platforms or all kinds of things. They're SEO experts. And he's actually looking for people that would be potentially good clients. And then also he's written a couple books. So he's trying to, and he's also a speaker. So he's got a whole bunch of different reasons for doing his podcast. And Doug, man, I listened to a couple of his podcasts yesterday. And he's just doing a fabulous job. So if you're into marketing, check that out. Real marketing, real fast. Why start a podcast? To serve people. One of my favorite podcasts is by a person by the name of Tara Brach. She's a meditation teacher. She's a psychologist. And, every once in a while when I need a little bit of a lift or I'm wondering about something sort of on a personal, spiritual level, I will go and listen to her podcast. And she is serving me. She's serving her audience. And her podcast has been a life changer for me. And then content. Somehow it's hard to create content, but man, people who do create content, people like Gary Vaynerchuk and so forth, they are so well known because they are just the content kings and queens. They are just putting content out there. And so when you do a podcast, you're creating audio, you're creating text, you're creating video, you're doing social media posts, and you're creating a ton of content. And it should really help lift your exposure and lift your prominence in whatever field that you're in. And then sales. This is really key. Your listeners are probably going to be listening to your podcast because they have a really defined, definite interest or need. And so, man, you're having people that are, if they're clicking on your podcast and listening to it, they have a real interest in what you're talking about. And it's a great opportunity to say, to create leads and to potentially make sales. Lots of people podcast just to express themselves. And so, why not? If that's something that you're into. And I think a lot of times people get into speaking because they just want to, they have a message and they want to get that message out there. And certainly there's a lot of messengers in podcasting who are just in it to share their unique perspective on things. You have repeat content. Like I said, it's a form of brand loyalty. Like I go back regularly to some of my favorite podcasters, and here they are. Tara Brach, On Being is just an amazing podcast. She interviews incredible people, the people who, the leader of the Black Lives Movement and things like that. She's very socially conscious. She interviews poets. There's been a couple of interviews that she's done with poets, again, that have just been transformational for me. Marie Howe and the name of the other poet escapes me, but she has interviewed some of my favorite poets as well. And then Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss is amazing. He does these long form interviews and he just interviews some of the most incredible people in the world. Personality sells. People are going to get to know you. People do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And so they're going to, by hearing you and hearing your interviews, they're going to get to know you, and they're going to know if they like and trust you as well. You get recognized as an expert. I know I keep going back to Doug, but Doug certainly has, I think, increased his exposure and has become much more. He already was, in a lot of people's minds, a marketing expert, but he's certainly cemented that through his podcast, and he's getting well known as an expert in the marketing field. And then there's less competition. There's approximately 1 million podcasts. There's 400 million blogs, and there's 1.8 billion websites. And at least what we're finding in podcasting is that people are really niching down. And so if you have a podcast in a particular niche, people are going to find you. And again, they're going to be there because they really want information on your particular area of expertise. And Roger, again, do you want to have a little bit of a conversation here? Let's talk about the Get Inspired Talks podcast that we're
Would you like a couple of questions first?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay, so Louisa asks, what type of equipment would you need to start a podcast?
Great question. Louisa, if you send me an email at rodj@getinspiredtalks.com, I'll send you a list of equipment. Basically, the simplest answer is get a good mic and make sure that you sound good. And I've been using Zoom lately, which is the platform that we're on right now, and I love it. It's just been a godsend. Before that, I was using Skype, and then I had to use third-party software to record on Skype. Zoom has it all built in, and on Zoom, I can do video and audio at the same time. And it's really easy for the end users to use, or for your guests to use as well. So, if you have a mic and Zoom, and then you're going to need to be on another platform, you're going to need to host your podcast somewhere. Lately, I've been recommending SoundCloud, although there are some other ones like Libsyn, which is probably the most popular one to use. So you're going to need some place to host your podcast as well. So yeah, a mic and then some good earphones. I think earphones keeps, like I'm wearing earphones now. It kind of keeps the echo away. So yeah, those are a few things.
So it seems to me the total bill to get started is a couple of $100.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And really invest in a good microphone. So it's going to be about a couple $100 for a good microphone, and then get a subscription to Zoom, which I think the first level is only like $16 a month or something like that.
Right. Yeah, $16 American.
Yeah, and then SoundCloud also charges. I think it's really worth it. SoundCloud is charging. I think it works out to be between $16 and $20 Canadian a month as well.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
Now a question from Jesse, and I'm not sure I understand it, but I'm just going to read it verbatim.
Okay.
What suggestions for following up from podcast interviews to thank and learn what did well and suggestions host might have for improvement?
Yeah, that's good. Interview Valet has created a questionnaire for me as a podcast host. And, I suppose you could do that as a podcast guest, like come up with 5 questions and make it really easy for the host to fill out. So, and just dive in and find out, like, what did you think of it, of the conversation? Maybe ask them, if you don't know, where did they promote it so that you can cross promote. And ask the host what they thought of the interview. And so that's a possibility. It's just ask the host what you did, and maybe have a form to fill out.
Great. Thank you. There's no other questions. So
Okay.
You wanted to have a conversation about Get Inspired Talks podcast?
Yeah. What do you want to say about it, Roger? What do you want to have any comments on the podcast and why you were interested in starting a podcast for Get Inspired?
Oh, you're interviewing me now. It's not.
That's what I do.
It's supposed to go this way, Rod. The whole purpose of Get Inspired is to have a platform for inspiring people to share ideas, fresh ideas that galvanize their audience to take action. And whenever there's enough of those speakers and enough audience members, enough actions can amount to millions upon millions of brave actions that inevitably has to have a significant impact on this one and only planet on which we live. And I was unable to find somewhere some central hub where inspiring people could tell their stories. I don't mean inspiring celebrities. I mean everyday people to whom we have ready access, who we may know, who we may see in the coffee shop, and we can have a chat with in the grocery store. Just ordinary people who are doing remarkable things, but they have no platform, and so they have no voice. I wanted us to create a voice, a platform that gave these people a voice. And Vancouver Get Inspired is only able to accommodate 20 speakers a year, but Get Inspired Talks podcast has no such limits. And so you and I created this podcast, and I think you've done a dozen interviews thus far, and are getting ready to launch. Am I assuming that?
Yeah. We've done 15 interviews so far, so 15. we're ready to go.
So we're ready to go. All right, we'll be launching pretty soon, I would guess.
Yeah.
And that's the whole logic behind the podcast.
Yeah, great. It's been so much fun, Roger, and it's been such an honor to do it. And I thank you for asking me to participate and to interview. It's just what an honor to interview such inspiring people. People who've pushed a shopping cart across Canada, and people who are addiction counselors, and people who are marketers and coaches, but still doing really inspiring things. It's been a lot of fun. I look forward to where this is going. And if you'd like to be a guest, just email me at rodj@getinspiredtalks.com, and we can talk about it. And I can let you know some of the parameters for the Get Inspired Talks podcast.
The big parameter is you have to be inspiring.
Yes, that's the main one. Exactly.
The most powerful piece of your interview is the call to action at the end.
Yes,
we want people not to academically listen to a fresh idea and say, "Oh, that was interesting." We want people to do something, to take action, to be galvanized into causing the world to address some of its issues and solve many of its problems. That's the whole purpose behind Get Inspired and the Get Inspired podcast.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, back to you, Rod.
Okay, so just wrapping things up, just talking about my own services and what I'm doing. I am doing podcast production, and I just thought I'd run through a few of the podcasts that I've produced in the past, or I am currently producing. Is it okay if I transition into this now, Roger?
Yep, this is great.
Okay, good. We did the Rapid Time Networks podcast. I would love to duplicate this at some point. Rapid Time Networks was a networking group, and we did podcasts on a couple different levels. I had a couple people that I helped set up and do their own podcast as a part of Rapid Time Networks as well. So we had 3 hosts. We did interviews with, we did 10 or 12-minute interviews with people that were members, and that just helped them to describe what they do in their businesses. And that's where I mentioned it earlier, that's where Scott Berg's interview came out of, that was on the first page of Google for a couple of years. And if anybody has a network, you're a member of a chamber of commerce or some sort of group like that, and you're interested in starting a podcast like the one we did for Rapid Time Networks, I'm looking for someone. I would love to duplicate that at some point. Fuelradio.com, as I mentioned earlier, started with my dad. He's had all these motivational speaker connections. I mean, and really with the top people in the world, Dennis Waitley and Jim Rohn and all kinds of people like that. And it's transitioned into what I'm doing today, which is just talking about the Wi-Fi lifestyle, working from where you want, when you want. So that's my own podcast. I did the Jelly Marketing podcast for a while, which was just incredible. I got to interview the top marketing people in the world. I'm serious, like people from Google and from Twitter, and from Hootsuite. It was a total blast. They're now, I helped them get launched, and now they're doing it themselves. So that was a lot of fun. I've mentioned the Real Marketing Real Fast podcast. So Doug, as I mentioned, is an incredible marketer. So he takes care of all of that. He takes care of the guest booking because he wants to make those connections. And then he does the interviews, and then I do everything else for him. We actually have a team of people on that one. So I'm more of the project coordinator on that podcast. And then Get Inspired Talks podcast. I consult and work with Roger. Roger provides the guests, and then I do everything else for that. I'm actually the host for that one. And the key to that one again is we're trying to find people that are inspiring and that can challenge our audience to take action. And then I mentioned the Smart Savvy People podcast, which is coming out in the fall. And I mentioned earlier too that they're doing it in order to do networking. So, we talked earlier, it doesn't take a lot of equipment to get set up, but to do it really well, to do anything really well, it takes a lot of time and effort. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. If you would like to work with me, I'm looking for people that just want to do what they do best. Talk about their area of expertise, interview people from their field, and then I'll take care of everything else. I have a team of people that work with me to do great audio production and graphics and social media, to spread the word and that sort of thing. So if you want to do it yourself, you certainly can. And but if you want some help with it and want to do a really professional job, I'm here to help. Here's my contact information. If you're interested in doing a Get Inspired Talks podcast interview, if you believe that you are an inspirational person, and if you're going to be on the Get Inspired Talks stage, you're a shoo-in. So please contact me, and let's book you for an interview. And this might also be a good way for you to audition for the Get Inspired Talks events. If you think you're inspiring, why not do an interview first, and then Roger will certainly hear it, and I'll let Roger know, hey, you got to talk to so-and-so. They're inspiring. I think they'll be a great person to stand on the Get Inspired Talks stage. You can reach me at rodj@getinspiredtalks.com. And then if you're interested in podcasting, one of the major questions I get is, can you make any money at it? So I've put together a really rough document, 30 ways to make money podcasting, and you can request that as well. So, Roger, are there any other questions, or do you have any other questions for me?
There's no other questions. I'm checking the chat. There's nothing in chat that would resemble a question.
Okay.
So maybe you'd like to make some concluding comments. If there are no questions after your comments, then we'll just wrap her up and off you go for lunch.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Roger, for inviting me to be here today and also to do the Get Inspired Talks podcast. It's, like I said, it's just a real honor and joy to do it. And if you're interested in being a guest, that's probably one of our main goals today, is to find people that would like to be on the Get Inspired Talks podcast. Let me know, and I'd be happy to interview you. Maybe I just quickly go through the process. It'd be just, make that request, and then we'll find a time that works for you, and we'll have you fill out the questionnaire that I talked about earlier. And then after that, I will email you some questions, some potential questions, and a Zoom link, and we'll go from there. So, yeah, and it's been I can't wait to release some of the interviews that we have. We've had some great guests and some really fabulous conversations.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it all.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no questions or anything that resembles a question. So let's just wrap her up. Audience members, our next speaker is 1:00 with Azadeh Yaragi. Azadeh is going to be talking about building a powerful brand and why it's crucial, particularly crucial for speakers, to have that powerful brand. So I shall be back a couple of minutes before 1:00. Rod, allow me, on behalf of all our attendees, to thank you for sharing your wisdom. It is very difficult to find one individual who knows as much as you do and has the practical transactional experience that you do in the whole world of podcasting. So thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Roger. It's been a pleasure.